The moment I stepped through those courtroom doors, my son-in-law's attorney turned around in his chair, looked me up and down, and actually laughed. Not a polite chuckle, a real, dismissive laugh, the kind that says, "Who brought the grandmother?" My daughter squeezed my arm. I told her it was fine. I'd seen that laugh before. I'd spent 31 years watching people underestimate me, and every single time, it worked in my favor. But I'm getting ahead of myself. My name is Eleanor. I'm 67 years old. I have silver hair that I stopped fighting about 15 years ago, reading glasses I can never find when I need them, and a tendency to bring too many cookies to neighborhood gatherings. To most people who see me at the grocery store or sitting in the third pew at church, I am exactly what I look like. A retired woman who tends her garden and occasionally forgets where she parked. What most people don't know, and what I worked very hard for decades to keep quiet, is that I spent the better part of my career as a forensic accountant for the Department of Justice. Not the kind who sits in an office adding columns. The kind they called in when a case had gone cold. When the money had vanished in ways that didn't make sense. When someone very smart had hidden something very carefully and assumed no one would ever find it. I was good at it. Quietly, unremarkably, persistently good at it. I retired at 62. I planted a garden. I learned to make bread. I became, to all outward appearances, a woman of gentle habits and simple pleasures. And then my daughter married Daniel. I want to be fair, because fairness matters to me more than almost anything else. When my daughter first brought Daniel home, I didn't dislike him. He was charming in that easy, frictionless way that some men are. The kind of charm that feels like warmth until you realize you can't actually remember anything specific he said. He had opinions about wine and strong handshakes, and he called me Eleanor instead of nothing, which I appreciated. My daughter Rebecca was 34 and happy in a way I hadn't seen from her in years. I kept my thoughts to myself. They were married in October. It was a beautiful wedding. I danced with my son-in-law and thought, maybe I'm wrong about him. I've been wrong before. Being wrong about people in a pleasant direction is one of life's better surprises. I was not wrong. The first thing I noticed wasn't dramatic. It rarely is in the beginning. It was just a comment Daniel made at Thanksgiving dinner about 8 months after the wedding. Rebecca had mentioned proudly that she'd gotten a promotion at the hospital where she worked as a nurse manager. Before anyone could respond, Daniel said, very pleasantly, "She's been struggling with the administrative side of things, though. All that paperwork, you know how she is." He smiled at me when he said it. Rebecca looked down at her plate. That was all. A small thing. But I filed it. The comments continued. They were always small, always deniable, always delivered with that easy smile. Rebecca was scatterbrained lately. Rebecca was so emotional, you know how she gets. Rebecca means well, but she's not great with money. Each one was a tiny stone, and Daniel laid them so carefully, so consistently, that after a while you could walk across them without noticing you were crossing a river. What I noticed most was what happened to Rebecca. She stopped finishing sentences. She started apologizing before she'd done anything wrong. She called me twice to ask if she was overreacting to things she described so carefully, so anxiously, that I could hear her measuring every word before she said it. My daughter had once been a woman who argued passionately about hospital policy at dinner tables and laughed too loud at her own jokes. She was becoming someone I was starting not to recognize. When I asked her directly if she was happy, she said, "I think so. I think I'm just stressed. Daniel says I have a tendency to catastrophize." I asked her when she started using that word. She didn't answer. I want to be clear about something. I did not begin watching carefully because I suspected fraud. That came later. I began watching because I love my daughter and something was wrong, and I've spent a lifetime learning to trust what the evidence tells me, even when I wish it said something different. So I paid attention. What I noticed over the following months was a pattern of financial behavior that didn't quite add up. Rebecca and Daniel had a joint account, which Rebecca had mentioned with some pride when they married. "We're doing everything together, Mom. We're really partners." But the things Rebecca mentioned needing, a new car when hers finally gave out, a weekend trip she'd been planning for her friend's birthday, money for a continuing education course her hospital wanted her to take, kept not happening. There was always a reason. Bad timing. The market. An unexpected expense Daniel was handling. Rebecca would mention these things and then, a few weeks later, mention them again, differently, as though she'd half forgotten she wanted them. Meanwhile, I had eyes. Daniel drove a car Rebecca had not mentioned. They'd done what Rebecca described as minor renovations to their kitchen, which I saw in December and which were not minor. Daniel golfed on Saturdays at a club I happened to know the membership fees of. I did not say anything, not yet. I had observations, not evidence. I know the difference better than almost anyone. I asked Rebecca gently how their finances were going. She said, "Oh, Daniel handles all of that. He's really good with money, honestly way better than I am." She laughed a little when she said it. It was not the laugh I was used to hearing from her. I went home and sat at my kitchen table for a long time. Then I made a list. Here's what I still had from my career: 31 years of pattern recognition, an understanding of how financial concealment works. Not the dramatic movie version, but the real version, which is slow and careful and relies on the assumption that no one is paying close enough attention. Contacts I'd maintained, because I've always understood that relationships are the most durable professional asset. And patience. I have never been in a hurry when it mattered. Here is what I needed to be careful about. I was not a federal employee anymore. I had no subpoena power, no official standing, no authorization to access anything I wasn't legally permitted to access. Whatever I found as a private citizen. I would need to be methodical about what was mine to look at and what was not. What was mine to look at was more than people might assume. Rebecca, without entirely realizing she was doing it, had kept me in a position of some small, practical usefulness in her household. I helped her with things, picking up prescriptions, occasionally watching the house when they traveled, helping her organize paperwork she found overwhelming. In this capacity, I had, over the previous year, seen things. A credit card statement left on the counter with a billing address that wasn't their house. A phone call Daniel took in the next room, voice low, that ended with a number, a dollar amount, that Rebecca later described a version of to me as a small loan he's repaying to a friend. A name written on a notepad near the kitchen phone that I recognized as a type of holding company structure I had seen before in a professional context. I wrote all of it down. I dated everything. I noted the source and my level of certainty. Then I called an old colleague. She had gone into private practice as a forensic investigator. She was thorough, she was licensed, and she understood exactly what I was and wasn't asking her to do. I told her what I had. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "Eleanor, this looks like a specific pattern." I told her I knew. She asked if I wanted her to look further. I said yes. What she found, through entirely legal means, public records, corporate filings, and some financial trail following that was her area of expertise far more than mine now, was that Daniel had structured a series of transfers over approximately 2 years that redirected money from accounts my daughter had contributed to and technically co-owned into accounts she had no visibility into. The amounts were not enormous at first. That was the pattern. Small enough to be noise. Consistent enough, over time, to become signal. There was also a woman. I want to mention this not for dramatic effect, but because it was relevant to what came next. My colleague found evidence of a separate residence, partially funded through one of the secondary accounts, with a lease in a name that connected back to Daniel through 2 steps that were meant to be untraceable. My colleague traced them in 4 hours. I sat with all of this for 3 days before I said a word to anyone. On the 4th day, I drove to Rebecca's house in the morning when I knew Daniel would be at work. I brought coffee and I brought the folder my colleague had prepared, and I sat across from my daughter at her own kitchen table and I put it in front of her. She didn't speak for a long time after she finished reading. Then she said, "Mom, how did you—" And she stopped. I told her who I had been. I told her what I had done for 31 years. I told her that I had not said anything sooner because I needed to be sure, and I needed what I found to be real, not just a mother's discomfort about a son-in-law she had never quite trusted. Rebecca put her face in her hands. I moved my chair around the table and I put my arm around her, and I did not say anything else for a while, because some things require silence before they require words. What followed was not simple, and I won't pretend it was. Rebecca called an attorney that same week, a recommendation from a colleague of mine who specialized in family law. She was advised on her options. She chose to pursue divorce and to pursue the financial claims through civil proceedings. With the documentation my colleague and I had assembled turned over to her legal team in full. Daniel's attorney, when served with the initial filings, apparently told Daniel not to worry. He had assessed Rebecca. He knew how she presented, uncertain, apologetic, prone to deferring. He had, I would later learn, expressed confidence privately that she would fold quickly under pressure. He had seen her, and he had not looked past what he expected to find. He had not, it turned out, looked at the supporting documentation carefully enough. And so we arrived at the morning of the first hearing, which was not a trial but a procedural matter. Assets, discovery, temporary orders. Rebecca's attorney had requested my presence as a supporting witness regarding the forensic documentation. I dressed the way I always dress, sensibly. A gray blazer I've had for 12 years, comfortable shoes, my reading glasses in my bag. I walked through those courtroom doors, and Daniel's attorney turned around and laughed. I found my seat. I set my bag down. I took out my glasses and my notepad because I have always taken notes, and I looked at the paperwork in front of me. The judge came in. We rose. We sat. There were preliminary matters. And then Rebecca's attorney stood up and said she wished to establish the credentials of the supporting expert present. And she said my full name and my former title and the division I had worked in and the approximate number of cases I had worked over my career. There was a silence in the room. The judge looked up from his papers. He looked at me for a long moment. He said, "The Eleanor Marsh?" I said, "I'm not sure there's more than one, Your Honor." He actually sat back in his chair. He said, and I will not forget this, "I clerked on a case in 1998 that you testified on, the Whitmore matter." He paused. I remember being told the analyst on that case had found something in the records that 3 other examiners had missed, something in the pattern of small transfers. I said, "That's correct." He said, "Counsel, I'd like to hear from this witness." Daniel's attorney had stopped laughing. What followed was not dramatic in the way courtroom scenes are in movies. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't make speeches. I walked through the documentation, point by point, with the precision I had spent a career developing. And I answered the questions I was asked with the specificity that comes from genuinely knowing what you're talking about. When opposing counsel tried to challenge my methodology, I answered patiently and completely, because I had anticipated every question he was going to ask before he asked it. I know how these challenges work. I spent years on the other side of them. The temporary orders issued that day were substantially in Rebecca's favor. In the corridor afterward, Daniel walked past us. He did not look at Rebecca. He did not look at me. He looked at the floor and he kept walking, and I noticed that his attorney was speaking to him in a low, urgent voice that had nothing of confidence left in it. Rebecca took my hand. She didn't say anything for a moment. Then she said, "Mom, why didn't you ever tell me?" I had thought about this question because I knew she would ask it. I told her the truth, that my work had required a kind of invisibility, and I had gotten used to it. And after a while, invisibility becomes a habit that's hard to examine. I told her that I had not wanted my career to define how she saw me or how she understood my interest in her life. I told her I was her mother first. Everything else was secondary. She squeezed my hand. She said, "I always thought you were the most observant person I'd ever met. I just thought it was a mom thing." I told her it was. It was absolutely a mom thing. The 31 years of federal service was just the formal version. There are still proceedings ahead. These things take time. Anyone who tells you otherwise has not been through one. Rebecca is living in the house for now, which the temporary orders support, and Daniel is elsewhere, the elsewhere that my colleague identified and documented, which has added its own complications to his situation. Rebecca is seeing a counselor. She is slowly starting to finish her sentences again. Last week, she argued with me about the best route to take to the farmer's market, and she did not apologize once, and I thought my heart might burst with something that felt a great deal like hope. She asked me a few days ago whether I missed my work. I thought about it honestly before I answered. I told her that I missed the clarity of it, the way a financial record is either consistent or it isn't, the way a pattern either holds or it breaks, the way the truth is always in there somewhere if you're willing to look past what you expect to find. I told her I didn't miss the long hours or the weight of it. Then I told her that the work I was most proud of in my entire career didn't happen in a federal building. It happened at her kitchen table on a Tuesday morning in March, with 2 cups of coffee and a folder I hoped I would never have to show her and knew I eventually would. She didn't say anything. She just nodded, the way she used to nod when she was a little girl processing something larger than she had words for yet. I go back to my garden. I bake my bread. My reading glasses turn up in the refrigerator sometimes, and on top of the microwave sometimes, and occasionally, inexplicably, in my coat pocket. To the neighbors, I am Eleanor, a pleasant woman of a certain age, quiet habits, reliable with cookies. What I am is patient. What I am is thorough. What I am is a mother. And I have always known that the most important cases are not the ones with the largest dollar amounts or the most official documentation. They are the ones where someone you love needs you to pay attention, and you do. And it turns out that every skill you spent a lifetime developing was always pointing toward exactly this. They forgot in that courtroom to ask the right question. They looked at me and they saw what they expected. They should have looked at what I was carrying. They should have asked why a grandmother brings a notepad to a court proceeding. They would have gotten their answer.